Get your filth out of my command center, you useless monkey! If you can stop this, I swear I will become your wife.
In the world of shadow operations, rank is everything. At the underwater black site Argus, Commander Sterling rules with an iron fist, commanding elite soldiers and controlling the world's secrets. But beneath the polished boots and gold medals, the machinery of war is kept running by the invisible men, the cleaners, the fixers, the ones treated like ghosts. They say power commands respect, but when the lights go out and death comes knocking, a uniform means nothing. Sometimes the only thing standing between order and chaos is the man holding a wrench, the man everyone forgot to fear. The underwater black site known as Argus hummed with the quiet, terrifying efficiency of a predator lying in wait. Located 3,000 feet beneath the Atlantic, the pressure outside the titanium walls was enough to crush a submarine like a soda can, but inside, the air was scrubbed sterile and cold. Commander Sterling walked the central corridor of the command deck, her heels clicking against the polished steel floor with a rhythm that sounded like a ticking clock. Every officer she passed snapped to attention, their spines stiffening in fear of her icy gaze. She was the youngest director in the agency's history, a woman who viewed mistakes not as learning opportunities, but as treason. Today was the annual inspection by the Joint Chiefs, and Sterling had spent weeks ensuring that Argus was a flawless diamond of military might. There was no room for dust, no room for error, and certainly no room for the man currently kneeling by a vent panel near the main server entrance. Vane adjusted the strap of his heavy utility belt, his knuckles white as he tightened a bolt on the atmospheric regulator. He was a shadow in a world of blinding lights, a man whose gray coveralls blended into the industrial machinery he maintained. To the elite cyber warfare officers walking past him, he was less than human. He was merely a piece of moving furniture that occasionally smelled of oil and solvent. He wiped a bead of sweat from his forehead with the back of a grease-stained glove, careful not to touch the pristine white walls. His job was simple: keep the air flowing and the coolant running so the real work could happen. He had felt the vibration in the number 4 turbine earlier that morning, a subtle tremor that whispered of a coming failure. He had come to fix it before it became a problem, but his timing could not have been worse. Commander Sterling stopped 10 feet away, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the gray smudge on her perfect landscape. She gestured to her lieutenant, a sharp movement of her hand that silenced the room instantly. "Why?" she began, her voice low and dangerous. "Is there a maintenance grunt in the secure zone during an active inspection cycle?" The lieutenant stammered, pale and sweating, but Sterling didn't wait for an answer. She marched toward Vane, who slowly stood up, keeping his head lowered in a gesture of practiced subservience. He towered over her by half a foot, his broad shoulder stretching the fabric of his worn coveralls. But he made himself small. He knew the rules of engagement here, and they did not involve eye contact. "You!" Sterling snapped, her voice cutting through the hum of the servers like a scalpel. "What do you think you are doing?" Vane kept his eyes on her polished black boots, noticing a microscopic scuff on the left toe that she would likely fire someone over later. "Turbine 4 showed a regular oscillation, ma'am," Vane replied, his voice rough like gravel, unused to speaking in this sector. "I was securing the intake valve to prevent overheating." He didn't explain that without this fix, the server room would be a sauna in an hour. He didn't explain that he was saving her operation. In her world, explanations were just excuses wrapped in incompetence. Sterling stepped closer, invading his personal space with a sneer of absolute disgust curling her lip. She reached out and ran a gloved finger along the doorframe Vane had just passed through, pulling it back to reveal a faint trace of gray dust. "You are contaminating my environment," she hissed, holding her finger up as if it were covered in toxic waste. "These servers process national intelligence, and you bring your filth into this sanctuary." She looked him up and down, taking in the jagged scar above his eye and the calluses on his hands. "You look like something we scraped off the hull," she added cruelly. The officers around them snickered nervously, relieved that the predator's attention was focused on the janitor and not them. Vane's jaw tightened, the muscle feathering beneath his stubble, but he did not speak. He had been screamed at by drill sergeants, interrogated by enemy combatants, and dismissed by politicians. A spoiled commander with a god complex was nothing new. "My apologies, Commander," he said simply, his tone devoid of sarcasm. "I will finish and leave." He reached for his toolbox, but Sterling kicked it away, the metal case skidding across the floor with a loud clang that made the nearby technicians jump. The sound echoed violently in the sterile silence. It was a petty, childish act, but it demonstrated her absolute power over his existence. "You will leave now," Sterling ordered, pointing a manicured finger toward the service elevator at the far end of the hall. "And you will report to administration for a citation." She turned her back on him, dismissing him as if he were a stray dog that had wandered into a cathedral. "Lieutenant, get a cleaning crew in here to sanitize this entire section," she barked, walking back toward the main console. "I want the air scrubbers at 100%. Vane picked up his tools slowly, his face an unreadable mask of calm. He didn't look at the other officers who watched him with pity or amusement. He simply turned and began the long walk to the elevator. However, as Vane reached the elevator doors, he paused, his instincts screaming louder than the alarms that hadn't yet triggered. The subtle vibration in the floor hadn't stopped with his fix. It had changed frequency, becoming a low, thrumming pulse that he felt in the soles of his boots. He looked back at the main server array, seeing a flicker on the status monitors that the busy analysts ignored. It was a pattern he recognized, not from maintenance manuals, but from sabotage operations he had once led in a past life. "Commander," Vane called out, his voice projecting with a command authority that startled the room. "Check your thermal output readings, now." Sterling spun around, her face flushing with rage at his insubordination. "Security!" she shouted, her patience finally snapping. "Remove this man from my deck immediately and have him thrown in the brig for insubordination." Two armed MPs stepped forward, grabbing Vane by the arms. He didn't resist, though his eyes remained locked on the main screen behind Sterling's head. He saw the numbers turning from green to yellow, climbing steadily toward the red line. They were blind to it, too focused on the spectacle of social hierarchy to see the technical disaster unfolding. "It's a logic bomb," Vane said, his voice calm despite the guards hauling him back. "It's cycling the cooling fans to burn out the motors." Sterling laughed, a harsh, incredulous sound. "A logic bomb? Did you learn that term from a movie, Janitor?" She shook her head, turning back to her console to dismiss his warning. "Get him out of here." The guard shoved Vane into the elevator, and the heavy doors began to slide shut, cutting off his view of the command center. He watched Sterling adjust her uniform, confident in her superiority, unaware that she was standing inside a bomb that was about to go off. The elevator doors sealed with a pneumatic hiss, and Vane immediately hit the emergency stop button. He wasn't leaving, not when he knew what was coming. Suddenly, the lights in the elevator flickered and died, replaced by the crimson glow of the emergency backup. Above him, the facility's PA system crackled to life, but it wasn't a human voice that spoke. It was the automated feminine voice of the central computer. "Alert. Critical thermal event detected in Sector Alpha. Containment protocol initiated." The elevator jolted, the mechanical locks engaging with a slam that shook the shaft. Back on the command deck, the laughter died instantly. Every screen on the massive wall turned a solid, terrifying red. The blast doors slammed down over the main exits, sealing Commander Sterling and her elite team inside the server room. The air circulation cut off with a dying wheeze, and the hum of the servers rose to a deafening scream. Sterling hammered her fist on the override button, but the system remained frozen. "Open!" she screamed, her composure shattering. "Override! Open the doors!" But the doors didn't move. Through the thick glass of the service elevator viewport, she saw a shadow moving in the red darkness. The man she had just humiliated was still there, watching the world burn. The temperature inside the command deck spiked 20 degrees in 3 minutes, turning the sealed room into a suffocating glass coffin. Red emergency strobes pulsed rhythmically, casting the panicked faces of the elite officers in a demonic light. Commander Sterling tore off her uniform jacket, her pristine white shirt now clinging to her skin with sweat, the gold cufflinks burning her wrists. She pounded the encrypted keypad of the main door until her knuckles bled, but the lockdown protocol was absolute. The automated voice, once a soothing guide, now counted down the minutes until critical thermal failure. Her team, the best cyber warfare analysts in the nation, huddled in the corners, stripped of their arrogance, watching their screens display the inevitable meltdown. Sterling turned to her lieutenant, expecting a solution, but found only terror. The man who had sneered at the maintenance worker earlier was now hyperventilating, tugging at his collar as he stared at the oxygen sensors. The carbon dioxide levels were climbing, and the air tasted metallic and stale. "Commander, the firewall has rewritten itself," he gasped, his voice cracking. "We're locked out of the root directory. We can't stop the reactor from cycling up." Sterling grabbed him by the lapels, shaking him violently. "Bypass it! Hack your own system!" she screamed. But he just shook his head, defeat written in his weeping eyes. Through the reinforced glass of the service elevator door, a single figure stood motionless in the red gloom. Vane hadn't left. He watched the chaos unfold with the detached calculation of a man observing a controlled demolition. He pressed the talk button on the maintenance intercom panel outside the door, his voice crackling through the high-end speakers inside the command deck. "Commander," Vane said, his voice steady and devoid of fear. "The thermal expansion is jamming the door bolts. You have less than 8 minutes before the coolant rods shatter." Sterling spun toward the voice, rushing to the glass partition that separated her from safety. She slapped her hand against the window, leaving a smear of sweat on the transparent barrier. "You!" she shrieked, her eyes wild with desperation. "Get to the manual override in the basement! Turn the valve!" She barked the order with the last shreds of her authority, clinging to the chain of command as if it could save her. Vane didn't move. He stood with his arms crossed over his chest, looking at her not as a superior, but as a victim. "The manual valves are electronic now, remember?" Vane replied, his voice cutting through her panic. "You authorized the upgrade last month to increase efficiency. There is no wheel to turn, Commander." Sterling froze, the memory of the authorization form hitting her like a physical blow. She had digitized everything to remove the need for human error, and in doing so, she had removed their only manual escape route. She slid down against the glass, her legs giving way as the heat became unbearable. The servers around them began to smoke, the smell of frying circuitry filling the room. "Then do something," Sterling begged, her pride evaporating with the oxygen. "Your maintenance. Break the panel. Hotwire it." She was grasping at straws, asking a man she deemed incompetent to perform a miracle. Vane leaned closer to the glass, his blue eyes piercing through the red haze. "I can't hotwire a localized AI takeover from out here," he stated flatly. "But I can kill it from the central core inside the reactor chamber. But I need your command authorization code to bypass the physical safeguards." Sterling hesitated. Giving the command code to a low-level uncleared employee was a court-martial offense. It was treason. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's classified top secret." Vane shrugged, turning as if to walk away into the shadows. "Then die with your secrets, Commander," he said, his boots heavy on the metal grating. "But know that your team dies with you because you cared more about protocol than their lives." A scream from the back of the room tore Sterling's attention away. One of the analysts had collapsed from heat stroke, convulsing on the floor. The reality of death crashed into her, shattering the walls of her ego. She scrambled back to the intercom, clawing at the glass. "Wait, Vane, wait!" she screamed, her voice hoarse. "I'll give it to you. I'll give you anything." She was weeping now, The Ice Queen melted down to a terrified girl who didn't want to burn alive. Vane stopped and turned back, his expression hardening. "It's a suicide run," he said, his voice dropping an octave, becoming dark and serious. "To reset the core manually, I have to enter the radiation zone. I have to crawl through the coolant vent. The heat alone should kill me." He looked at her, studying her face. "Why should I die for you, Starling? You who called me industrial waste 10 minutes ago." It wasn't pettiness. He was testing her will to survive. Sterling stared at him, seeing for the first time the strength in his jaw and the intelligence in his eyes. She realized suddenly that he was the only man in the world who could save her. The heat was making her dizzy, hallucinations flickering at the edge of her vision. In a moment of pure, unadulterated madness, she grasped for the most valuable thing she could offer, the ultimate surrender of her high-status life. She pressed her face to the glass, her eyes locking with his. "If you do this," she gasped, the words tumbling out in a feverish rush. "If you save my ship, if you save my people," she swallowed hard, the taste of ash in her throat. "I will marry you. I swear it on my life, on my rank. I will be your wife. I will give you everything I am." The room went silent, save for the blaring alarms. Her subordinates stared at her in shock, but she didn't care. She was bargaining with the Reaper, and Vane was the only one holding the scythe. Vane stared at her for a long second, processing the absurdity and the gravity of her vow. He didn't smile. He didn't mock her. He simply nodded, a sharp, decisive movement. "Code," he demanded. Sterling recited the alphanumeric sequence, her voice trembling. Vane typed it into his wristpad, and the service hatch next to him hissed open, revealing a dark, steaming tunnel leading into the reactor's heart. He unzipped his gray coveralls, stepping out of them to reveal a black tactical undershirt soaked in sweat, his muscles tensing as he prepared for pain. "Stay alive, Commander," he said, diving into the darkness. "I'm coming for you." The reactor core was a hellscape of hissing steam and blinding white light. Vane moved through the labyrinth of superheated pipes, his skin screaming as the ambient temperature pushed past human tolerance. The rubber soles of his boots softened against the metal grating, threatening to melt with every step. He didn't run. Running led to mistakes, and mistakes here meant vaporization. He moved with a predatory grace, a rhythmic efficiency that had been drilled into him during years of Black Ops training. He timed his movements with the venting steam, sliding under high-pressure jets that would have sliced a normal man in half. Back on the command deck, the screens flickered back to life, displaying a grainy thermal feed of the reactor room. Commander Sterling stared at the monitor, her hands pressed over her mouth. She watched the janitor navigate the death trap with the precision of a dancer. "Look at his movement patterns," the lieutenant whispered, his voice trembling with disbelief. "He's not hesitating. He knows the blind spots of the thermal sensors." Vane vaulted over a ruptured coolant line, a move that required Olympic-level agility, landing silently despite his heavy boots. It was becoming terrifyingly clear that the man they had mocked was not who he claimed to be. Vane reached the central override console, the metal casing glowing cherry red from the heat. His breathing was shallow and controlled, filtering the searing air through clenched teeth. He saw the manual release lever, but the hydraulic assist was dead. He would have to force the 10-ton dampening rods down with pure brute strength. He gripped the searing metal handle, the smell of burning skin filling his nose immediately. He didn't scream. He channeled the pain into focus, his biceps bulging as he pulled against the weight of the failing system. "Come on," Sterling whispered, tears streaming down her face, mingling with the sweat. "Don't die. Please don't die." On the screen, Vane roared, a primal sound of exertion that echoed through the facility's speakers. With a final bone-crushing heave, the lever slammed down. The floor shuddered violently as the dampening rods crashed into the core. The red warning lights on the main deck stuttered and instantly turned to a soothing, steady green. The roar of the reactor faded to a dull hum, and the oxygen scrubbers kicked back on with a loud hiss. The blast doors to the command deck unlocked with a heavy clank. The elite officers cheered, hugging each other in relief, but Sterling didn't join them. She shoved past her celebrating team, sprinting toward the service elevator. She didn't care about protocol or the soot staining her uniform. She hit the button for the reactor level, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had made a promise in the face of death, and she intended to keep it, provided there was anyone left to keep it with. When the elevator doors opened, the corridor was filled with thick, white fog. Sterling coughed, waving her hand to clear the air, searching for a silhouette. He found him slumped against the wall near the decontamination shower, his chest heaving. His tactical undershirt was shredded, and his arms were wrapped in angry red burns. He looked up as she approached, his eyes glassy but alive. He tried to stand, instinctively reaching for a weapon that wasn't there, before recognizing her. "Easy," Sterling said, dropping to her knees beside him. She reached out, her trembling fingers hovering over his injuries, afraid to cause him more pain. "You did it. You saved us." Vane coughed, spitting out soot, and managed a weak, lopsided grin. "Just doing my job, Commander," he rasped, his voice wrecked by the smoke. "Industrial waste cleanup." The irony hung in the air, heavy and shaming. Suddenly, the facility's main communications screen in the hallway flickered. The system reboot triggered an automatic identity verification for the person who had accessed the core. A large holographic file materialized in the air above them, projecting Vane's face, clean-shaven and in full dress uniform. The text scrolled rapidly. Captain Vane, Alexander, Special Air Service, Tier 1 operative, status, deep cover/retired. The janitor was a legendary ghost, a man with more confirmed kills and medals than Sterling's entire security detail combined. Sterling stared at the hologram, then back at the man bleeding on the floor. Her breath hitched in her throat. The lieutenant and the security team arrived moments later, skidding to a halt as they saw the file floating in the air. The silence was absolute. The men who had laughed at his boots now stood paralyzed, realizing they had been ordering around a war god. The lieutenant turned pale, slowly bringing his hand up to a salute, his arrogance completely evaporated. "Captain," Sterling whispered, the word feeling strange on her tongue. "Why? Why the cover? Why the mop?" Vane groaned as he leaned his head back against the wall. "Peace," he muttered, closing his eyes. "I just wanted a quiet life fixing air conditioners. I was tired of the noise." He opened one eye, looking at her. "Guess that's over now." The vulnerability in his admission cracked the last of Sterling's icy exterior. 2 days later, in the sterile white of the medical bay, Sterling sat in a chair beside Vane's bed. She was not wearing her uniform. She wore a simple civilian dress, her hair down in loose waves, stripped of her rank and armor. Vane watched her, his arms bandaged from wrist to elbow. "You were delirious," Vane said softly, breaking the silence. "Heat stroke, panic. The promise doesn't count." He was giving her an out, a way to save her reputation and walk away. Sterling stood up, walking to the edge of the bed. She placed her hand over his bandaged one, her touch gentle and firm. "I am a Sterling," she said, her voice clear and strong. "We do not break our oaths." She leaned down, her face inches from his, her ice blue eyes now warm with a new emotion. "And besides," she whispered, a ghost of a smile touching her lips, "I've decided I need a husband who can handle the heat." She kissed him then, a soft, lingering seal on their reckless contract. It wasn't the kiss of a superior to a subordinate, but of a woman to the man who had walked through fire for her. Outside the glass walls, the facility hummed with life, but the power dynamic had shifted forever. The janitor and the Ice Queen walked out of the medical bay hand in hand, facing a scandal that would rock the military world, and a love story that would become a legend.